All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome
Hey.
back to another exciting discussion about virtual reality. I am your host, Jared Lynch, and I'm joined by.
Guer Gleffy.
Meg Noakes.
And James Hahn.
Hello. And today we are here to talk about virtual reality cinema or VR cinema. And we're just gonna kind of talk about this just through a couple of different movies that have really stuck out to us, a couple of different experiences that have really stuck out to us. So kind of one of the first ones I want to talk about is I think it's because it's the most recent one that I've seen personally, but was Crow or Crow the Legend. Is that I think that's the.
I think that's the full title, yeah.
But so Crow is it is about the Native American what was that? Yeah, it is about it's a retelling of a Native American folk story or myth about how the crow flew up past the sun and brought back fire, and that's how we have fire on Earth. But in the process, he flew into the sun, got burned by the sun, and then he burned off all his beautiful multicolored wings. And then he came back, and then that's how the crow became the crow and kind of has a raspy voice and everything. So they got all burned up. But so why I wanted to start with this one was that I personally just think that it's also just like a really, really well made experience. Like you could tell there's a lot of people behind this and a lot of like really big names in the field, like John Legend and Oprah Winfrey and there were some other people who
Constance Wu from Crazy Rich Asian.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay. But yeah, so I think that this is just a really great look at just VR cinema because personally I was really struck by the way that it played with like scale, which is something that's really, really that's really interesting that you can do in VR. So you can like shrink your point of view way down to this little tiny bug, but then also like you're flying through space and like past the sun and stars.
And the interesting thing there is that if you look at conventional cinema, there's some degree that you can mess with scale as you're like figuring out what the camera angle is and how it's showing people and what it's focusing on. But when you're in virtual reality, you're always looking all around you, and that's giving you so much more of a context of your own scale. If you think of it through the lens of looking through a single camera, I might have a microscope and be looking at this small thing. But if you take me down to that bug size in VR, and now the trees are really huge, it's like, oh wait, oh crap, I am a bug. And it really changes the way you feel because more so than like other mediums, VR puts you in that space. It says, here you are in this space with the characters watching them. And that immersion just automatically happens because you as the viewer are naturally going to be looking around and going, hey, what's that? As you're trying to think about everything that's going around you, the same way you would if you were just having a conversation in real life.
Yeah. I also almost want to compare it to like the old school like 3D movies. So like when 3D movies first came out, you can see it directly through your glasses. It's almost like the picture frame is coming out towards you. But imagine the inverse way, so where you're getting put into that space rather than that space coming out towards you to be able to have a general base all around you rather than just directly it slightly coming towards you.
Right, like one of those sci-fi movies where people get pulled into the movie screen. It's basically that, just in real life, virtual life.
And also like that definitely gets into, the immersiveness of immersive technology. So it's just like instead of like you were saying, instead of projecting something onto you, like it's putting you in that place instead.
Yeah.
Which that's just like more like the powers of VR.
Yeah, and that's and something that also leads to, which I think Crow in particular did well, is the fact that you have somebody who's now in a space with the actors or the characters or whatever's happening in the world. I wanted to say on screen, but there's no screen, not really. And they're looking around and their attention is wandering and they're looking for things to focus on. And now instead of this single perspective camera that's telling them what to look at and giving them like the shape of the space as it makes choices about where it's looking and what it's looking at, now in VR, your attention just wanders on its own, and VR can use that. It can have a little fly move across the screen and you watch it and it takes you to looking at another part of your environment that you might not have. Or like with Crow, during a lot of the scene transitions, there would be like shining lights that move you back and forth, but then something would move across your vision. The whole point was that the directors were trying to get you to look one way so that then when the action happened, your gaze would naturally follow it. And thinking about how to do that, I think is really interesting because it's a challenge that has not existed before immersive cinema. It's a totally new landscape that artists and creators have to figure out what the hell they're doing with, which is really interesting.
And I was gonna say, to that point, that reminds me of this this video. I think it's from like 2016, so like kind of right when a lot of these experiences were first starting to come out. But it was a presentation from the then leader of Oculus Studios, and he was talking about exactly this, and just like how I forget the explicit experience, but they're talking about how they did a lot of testing about just like, how long on average people just spend to just like look around them. They're like, okay, so like people on average spend about 45 seconds just looking around them. So we'll give them that time where like nothing really happens, but then it's like like a firefly comes from off screen, and then they start paying attention to that, and that like focuses them again, and then they bring in the titles. So it's that
explains a lot about the slow beginnings to a lot of movies I've watched. I didn't think about like how much design effort there was in like that peaceful start. Like even Crow had that. You're literally just like sitting in the forest and you're hearing him sing like half a mile away. Interesting.
Yeah, I love Crow because it's so interactive and it easily holds your attention. And this was one that we showed to the Academy of Whole Learning for kids on the spectrum. And because it is so interactive and it's constantly kind of like moving your attention around, it was like a real hit with them, and they just really liked it. So just another reason. It's a good one.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It like taps into certain ways of thinking about and looking at things that can be really helpful, like a lot of VR. I suppose one other thing. Oh no, feel free to go, Jared. I was just thinking about Piggy. But what are you thinking about?
No, go for it.
Yeah, no. So, like one thing that sort of leads into when I think about like the interactivity and the immersion, the fact that you're jumping into the world is the fact that depending on the experience, it can change or react to that. So one particular story that sort of comes to mind was one of the Google Spotlight stories they created, Piggy, where if I remember correctly, you're staring at, I think it's a cake, maybe a birthday cake, and there's a little cartoon pig that obviously wants to eat the cake, and he's like sidling towards it. But if you look at him, he edges away. And what happens in that story depends upon the experience, the headset, knowing where your focal point is. And in this case, that was the whole point of the story, right? It was calling your attention to this thing and forcing you to look around, and that was a big part of it. But this is something that like VR movies, especially ones that have like 3D animation behind them, because there's a lot of flexibility there, can do as much as they want. They can have things that light up or dance or move or interact depending on if you're looking at them or not. And because of that, they can do things like not have distractions in your peripheral vision, or they can change the story entirely depending on if you were paying attention to something. And like that, coupled with the sense of really being there, is just, again, this whole world that a few people have explored with concept videos, but that I'm really excited to see more people create in, because like, what do you even do there? Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, and it like that also reminds me of this there's an article I read about this 360 video director. But so they shot this scene, and then they ended up going back and reshooting it, because it was a scene of this this girl like practicing her violin, and it's just like you can tell she's like kind of starting to just get at a point where she can actually kind of play, because she's just still starting out. But then so that's a main focus, but then behind it you actually see her parents in the doorway, like kind of watching her and just like seeing like their reactions, like, oh, like she's getting it. So it's like this actually just like really awesome moment in this family. And it's just like, if you just watch a girl playing the violin, it's like, you wouldn't catch that it's like a bigger picture and like a bigger moment than it actually is.
Yeah. People talk a lot about different every time you watch it, but in that case, depending on how you watch it, you really see a different story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary but interesting to empower the viewer that way.
And I was gonna say, you can kind of see that also in the newest, Disney just released a new movie called Myth, which is like an origin story for the Frozen universe. But I was gonna say, I know that some of you have kind of discovered that it's like more of like a 6 Degrees of Freedom, instead of just a video, especially. Because I personally haven't really explored that, but
Yeah, it's really not super noticeable. And if you're just sitting and watching it normally, you won't necessarily pick it up right away. But like I could feel it normally. If you're just watching a 360 video, you turn your head, you look around, and we've talked about this before, but those 3 degrees of freedom, like turning your head around, is all the headset can detect. So when you move your head back and forth, the video stays the same, and you just kind of get used to that. But in Myth, you're stuck in this little space where the action is happening around you. But if you take like 2 steps to your left, the world actually shifts with you. They created the whole world, and it's rendered assuming that you can move around, which again doesn't change the story much. You're in a little circle and things happen around the circle, just like if you were stuck in a normal 360 video. But the fact that I could naturally move my head, that I could like crouch down to look at something and it would get a little bit closer, or I could tilt my head to the side and something that was out of view behind a tree would kind of slide into view, added this tiny little like back of my brain level of immersion that I thought was just absolutely amazing. Like I literally spent a middle portion of the video just kind of like ducking my head back and forth, seeing how it changed the way things looked, because it was just cool. And it's just something that like, then you get into like, I don't know, when does it stop being a film and when is it an experience? You know, like when does it become a game or like an interactive, immersive, something word we haven't come up with yet. But I think that's a philosophical question more than a VR question.
let's say that is a discussion we could go on for hours, but never actually go anywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
What is film? I know people who could answer that question for hours.
Probably Jared.
Probably Jared, actually, now that I think about it.
Just go on a tangent, move away from it.
All right, so everyone else can disconnect. Jared, just record another hour or so of talking about the nature of cinema. We can pretend to listen if you really want.
We'll go back and watch it after it's done.
Absolutely, 100%. We'll do.
But on the same note, regarding what you were saying, Blair, it does let you kind of see it in multiple perspectives. So like people watch films back multiple times as well. But I'm someone that easily misses like certain details if it's like hidden in the background. And when you're in like a VR film, you're able to like you said, for Myths specifically, you can move around, notice different things. Some things might not even appear unless you do move around. So like it allows you to see different things. If you were like, what if it was a mystery based story where you miss like details in the background unless you move to a certain spot? So it's like you could follow it through in like the way that it's like set up to where you're just staying in one spot, or you can kind of solve it through with all the puzzles that you can see throughout the film by moving into different spots of it. It gives you more options, and I think that's the one good thing about it, rather than like your old basic film where it follows through one viewpoint rather than multiple.
Yeah. Although that does make me think of something that kind of, what you were talking about with the mystery made me think of a different experience that took that, but like to the extreme. I think a couple of you have done this. The Under Presents. I think I've played it on the Oculus Quest.
Yeah.
It's meant to be you're in like this surreal theater outside of time and space, and the first show they take you into is like a boat where there are a bunch of mysterious disappearances, and you start on the first day of this like marine researcher with her first day on a boat, or no, she's a writer. But there's a bunch of other things happening on the boat and a bunch of people having conversations. And the only way to listen to them all is to go back in time and travel to different parts of the boat, rewatching it on different sections, with the whole point being that you're supposed to explore the boat and relive the story tons and tons of times to figure out what the hell is going on. And you could do that, or like James was saying, you could do that as part of like a single shot video, but with lots of details. VR is crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, then it would bring so many more potentials for like branching narratives and
Hmm.
yeah, just like emerging narratives. And it's just like depending on which character you would follow, like then that like
Yeah.
progresses a story in a specific way. Yeah, so I'm super excited to just kind of see some future, just like how
Yeah.
people are just playing with that kind of just that sense of self and like sense of like
Yeah.
perspective, like where you're looking, everything like that.
Yeah, I suppose one thing we haven't really talked about a lot is we've really been focusing on animated narratives, which is obviously in part because there's a lot more of them, as 360 cameras aren't super easy to get your hands on, and more people I think have been experimenting with animation in VR than with like recording videos. But there are a lot out there, especially documentaries and like impact stories, which is something that we've done a decent amount of work with at REM5. I don't know if somebody else wants to take the lead on that because that's something
Mm.
I'm only somewhat familiar with, but it's really interesting to like start like shift over to that kind of side of the spectrum.
Yeah, and I think like within cinema and within VR, I think just the power of having this like storytelling power is really, really cool in VR specifically because it is like this empathy generator. So you can tell these really, really powerful stories as if you're in that first person experience.
Mhm.
And there's so many different documentaries, but one of my favorites is Space Explorers, narrated by Brie Larson, and it's from Felix and Paul Studios. And they just came out with a new episode that I just did last week. They kind of go and follow along the storyline of like how right now the whole world is kind of coming together and like piling all of their space data and like everything and like working as a team to use like the International Space Station as a powerful tool in just like space exploration. But yeah, they go on like you get to see part of like the SpaceX launch in it. But yeah, it's
And
really neat.
so that's I haven't seen that one. So that's more of like a documentary style then.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's like real life footage pretty much throughout the whole way, and it's cool because you also get to do like in person like interview style things. So it's like you're and it is in a post COVID world and parts of it too. So you are with this astronaut behind like a plexiglass screen, and you're just like getting the interview of what it's like to be like in the astronaut community and like how you know everybody's like been recently coming together for the progression of just space knowledge, and it's kind of like a national thing, which is cool to see because I know a lot of areas in life nationally we don't exactly come together for global progression, so it's cool to see it at least in one piece of life in space.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really sweet, and I think that it's one that you could even potentially watch not in VR as well. But
Yeah.
obviously, VR adds to it on a whole other level.
Yeah, because like you're talking about being right next to an astronaut. Like there's lots of interviews where the camera is like closed up on their face, but that doesn't feel like you're in a room with someone. Actually sitting down in a chair or a virtual chair and talking to them through that or listening to them through that, it feels like you're part of that space. And like we were talking about with your eyes being able to wander, you can pay attention to details in the environment. They can gesture to things and you can actually see them and you can feel like they're talking to you. And that makes it so much more personal, both just for being interested in what someone is talking about, like space, or for caring about their experiences and actually like recognizing it as another person's narrative and not just, you know, something up on a screen.
Just a story on a screen.
Right. We look for so many cues as humans that I think start to happen in VR that don't happen if you're just watching somebody on a screen.
Well, and
Really
like, and just like VR, like its capability of literally transporting you, like transporting your mind to places that like most people won't be able to go, and like that's like, and we're like when you take that into like outer space, like that's awesome. Like it's like no,
Right.
that's like, most of us won't be able to go into space. Like most of the human race won't be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I was never even sure if I wanted to go into space, and then I got to sit in a VR headset as if I was floating in space, and now I know I definitely don't want to go to space. So like that was really powerful.
Right. Yeah, and I think one part that's also really cool is like when you're watching these astronauts tell their stories of how they, spent all this time like on the International Space Station and how like emotionally attached they are to this place and like they see it as like their second home and just being able to see like how passionate they are about, this thing that's a huge part of their life. Then I watch that from like my first person perspective and I take some of that like into my own life. And now I have this like weird connection where like I obviously didn't go to the International Space Station and I probably never will, but now there's like this weird part of my brain that feels like I have gone there because of VR.
Well, I feel like VR allows you to make that connection a lot easier because as much as people can try to relate, I feel like seeing things from your own perspective makes it easier for you to notice certain aspects. So we can watch things on screens as much as we want, but without being there directly, it makes it much harder for you to actually know what's happening. Like, people have seen the same scenes on a TV screen, and then they get put into VR, and they're still shocked. Like,
even if it's the exact scene that they're going to be in, they're like, oh wait, it feels like real. It's like like real.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's similar to how we have things set up even at the lab itself, because people sitting down are just watching it on a TV screen, and then they're not thinking of it much. And then when you put them into the same scenery from the person's perspective that was in VR before, now they're the person in that perspective. They're realizing for the first time exactly how different it is and exactly what they were going on about. So
yeah. Embodiment, like feeling embodied in a space in virtual reality, is such a powerful tool. And the nice thing about cinema is that it's maybe the most flexible tool for utilizing that, because you can put somebody in a space and then just tell whatever story you want, and they're in the space so they care more. And that's like already this big thing you have in your corner, making like a VR documentary or a story about a crow. Like whatever you're doing, suddenly your audience cares more because they're there. And I think that's really the central point of all of what we've been talking about.
Oh, I know. And it's like sometimes I literally just like, and I'll just be like just going about my day, and then like I'll have like a flash of like something that like I've seen in like Half-Life Alyx, and it's just like, whoa, I was actually, it's like I'm thinking about that, like I was actually there. And I remember
Storing it in that like brain section.
Yeah, and it's just like not to get like too much into the realm of that, but yeah, I remember listening to this podcast about like VR, especially. It just like it's about like making memories, and not so much just like memorizing stuff, but it's about actually like making memories in your head.
Yeah,
that's why it's like you can retain those specific details that you noticed in a completely different way. But again, that's a whole that's another 5 hours.
Yeah, there we go.
Like,
that's another thing Jared can talk about for 6 hours when he has some time to record it. I'll listen. All right. Were there any big things that we really forgot to talk about, like major experiences we liked, or any other like parts of it that I'm not really thinking of?
not to my knowledge. I think that's kind of everything that we were setting out to talk about.
Always fun to chat.
Yeah.
Always.
I mean, we talk about this stuff for hours anyway. It's like,
yeah, we just never enough time in the day.
I know. All right. Well, thank you all for sitting down and talking with me today. And until next time.
Yeah.
Thanks for hosting us again. All right.
Auf Wiedersehen.
See ya.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.